My dementia brain mother-in-law fought me because I'm having a baby girl. She thinks I've cheated on my husband just because I had a girl. I am 26 and my husband is 30. Mother-in-law is 70 years old. She and my father-in-law had my husband later in life as a last chance to have a kid. My husband has a name like John William Smith, for the name has been passed down for literally generations. I will also mention, as it's important, there has not been a girl born on his side of the family in more than 100 years. There's a huge running joke that the men in his family cannot produce female babies. So fast forward to our wedding day in 2017. I've had a pretty good relationship with my mother-in-law up until this point. Wedding was great, a beautiful ceremony, funny speeches, everything was great. Really, until it's the end of the night and we are getting ready to go leave to enjoy our honeymoon suite and she looks me dead in the eye and says, "Now go make us our," insert my husband's name, plus an extra Roman numeral. I nervously laughed and we departed. Well, ladies and gents, I indeed did make a beautiful baby with my husband over those 2 weeks, and who would have thought, a baby girl. Everyone was so shocked when we announced it was a girl, and most of the family denied it up until the moment she was born. That's when the horrible comments started. Whenever my husband isn't around, my mother-in-law and her family members will make snarky comments like, "I wonder where she got that nose, it's definitely not my husband's." For your information, my baby, as beautiful as she is strikingly, obviously my husband's. She genuinely looks more and more like him as the first year has gone by, and even more so approaching 2. Well, as it would happen, we are now expecting our second baby. And, yep, another girl. I begged my husband not to tell my mother-in-law the gender when we found out, as I just wanted to enjoy a bit more of this pregnancy before she ruined it. I had decided to keep the mean comments his mother made to me about our first daughter to myself, as she's old and in poor health, and I felt guilty about potentially ruining their relationship when she probably doesn't have many years left to be around. I figure I'll adhere that mother-in-law isn't dying or anything. She's just had extremely poor health her whole life, smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, eats garbage constantly, drinks only Diet Coke, refuses exercise, etc. I literally offered this woman water once after she almost passed out from walking 15 steps and she gagged and said, "That's disgusting. Water makes me nauseous, get me my Diet Coke." So anyways, he insists on announcing it at our next visit, and holy crap y'all. As soon as she heard it was another girl, tears welled in her eyes and she started shaking her head back and forth and sobbing. She then started yelling at me, called me a whore, and demanded I get out of her house. My husband immediately stands up and starts yelling at her, asking what her problem is, and that she needs to apologize to me and watch her mouth in front of her grandkids. She says through broken wails, "Not ours. Not ours. Those 5 earls are not ours." She's a W word. A S word. My son did not make those jive earls. I start crying hysterically and pick up my daughter, who is utterly confused as to why daddy is yelling at grandma and mommy is now crying. My mother-in-law then looks at me and starts yelling, "I let you get away with it the first time. I took you in his family. I allowed my son to believe he fathered that brat, but I will not allow it again." My husband is now effing pissed y'all. Something I should mention here is that while my husband prepared his whole life to having a son, he was thrown on his butt when our daughter was born. He never knew that he could love any girl in the world as much as he loves our daughter. He has made several comments over the past year and a half that he never knew how deep love could go before he held our baby girl. I can 100% assure you that if he had to save me, our daughter, or his mom, he'd save our daughter 10 times. He gets extremely pissed and starts screaming at her that she is out of line and how dare she call his daughter names. He then goes on to say that we are leaving, and until she comes to her senses, she will never see any of us again. She tried to say something more, but he cuts her off and yells at her, "By the way, Mom, I love that little girl more than I ever loved you," as he is shuttling us out the door. I cried and broke down and told my husband all the little comments she and her family have said to me when he's not around while we drive the 2 hours home. He was so angry at them all and has been amazing in comforting me through it. We went NC for a few months and everything seemed to be going great. We blocked her and father-in-law phone numbers and hadn't heard from them except through other relatives over Facebook. We either told them to not attempt to relay messages from mother-in-law or they would be blocked, or ignored them completely. Then, when I was nearing my due date, we decided to be the bigger person and reach out to her and father-in-law and offer them a chance to make things right. She whines and whines that she misses my husband and granddaughter. We agreed to meet for dinner at their house after a few weeks for a proper talk and apology from her. We agreed that our daughter should not be present, so my sister was set to babysit her. We arrive, dinner is served and we're trying to make small talk when my husband is like, "Yeah, Mom. This has all been nice, but we need to talk about what happened and the things you said last time we were here. I know, and you know that you owe my wife an apology." Mother-in-law then looks at my husband and says, "Yes, do you have the test?" My husband, "What?" Mother-in-law, "The paternity test. I am not apologizing until I'm proven wrong. And we both know I'm right. You cannot be the father, and the fact that you have now apparently made 2 girls is ridiculous." My husband, "What the heck is wrong with you?" I start to cry and go to get up to grab my things and go to the car. Mother-in-law, "Oh no you don't." She shoots up, rounds the table and grabs my shirt, then proceeds to scream at me, "How dare you try to run away from this? You're a effing whore and you need to own up to this problem." My husband screams at her to get her hands off of me, and starts to make his way towards us. She then decides that I cannot be allowed to leave at any cost with her son, so she slaps me as hard as she can across my face. I push her arm away from me as I let out a scream from the shock of being slapped. My husband then gets in between me and his mom and starts to scream at her. He tells father-in-law to call the cops right now. Father-in-law ignores him and tries to calm mother-in-law down, insisting that we can deal with this. My husband is furious and I'm crying hysterically. He grabs my hand and we are making our way to the door when mother-in-law grabs a snow globe from a shelf and throws it directly at me, and it hits me right in the back of my head. It didn't shatter or anything, but it did end up hitting me on the base and cut my head open. I fell to my knees from the pain, and before my husband can put together what just happened, she is grabbing anything she can find to throw in my direction. I'm on my knees on the ground holding my head with one hand and my belly with the other, being almost 9 months pregnant as a cascade of random items are being thrown at me. My husband is screaming at the top of his lungs for her to stop, and she proceeds to try to get close enough to kick me as hard as she can. Thankfully, she is old and in bad health, so she loses momentum quickly, and as a last resort my husband pushes his mom and she falls back into a shelf by the front door and he rushes me out. I'm crying and freaking out and yelling. She kicked my stomach over and over and he drives me to the hospital. I end up getting 6 stitches in my head and being monitored in hospital for 4 days because she kicked my belly. The baby ended up being fine, and the hospital demanded we file a police report. We find out that when my husband pushed his mom into the shelf, she ended up breaking 2 fingers and is claiming the excessive force hurt her neck very badly. Father-in-law called an ambulance for her and she claimed that me and my husband assaulted her in her doorway after they refused to let us in for a free dinner. Cops showed up and took our side of the story and compared our own report that we filed once at the hospital. They told us that mother-in-law is demanding to press charges against my husband for assault, while we are pressing charges against her. So then my husband gets arrested but then quickly released after father-in-law is forced to tell the truth, and mother-in-law then gets arrested for my assault. Father-in-law is now begging us to drop the charges as no one was hurt. What? I was effing hurt. And my baby could have been hurt, and that we are being cruel to lock up an elderly woman. He insists that we drop the charges, say it was all a misunderstanding, and he puts mother-in-law in counseling. Thing is, because my injuries were documented in hospital, we literally can't drop the charges even if we were stupid enough to do so. Because it was filed through a hospital, there's no way it can just go away. We are currently at home waiting for baby number 2 to arrive. I am on a strict bed rest order and my husband has taken the week off of work to help pamper me and take care of our daughter. I asked my husband if once baby number 2 arrives, we get paternity tests for both girls to send to his mom in jail, as a huge FU. He thinks it's a hilarious idea and thinks we should also make copies and send them to all the relatives who were entertaining his mom's craziness, along with a written letter saying goodbye. That none of them will ever see us or his daughters again, and that he hopes they're all happy knowing that they've ruined any chance they had to have a relationship with him, or our children ever again. We are so thankful that our baby girl is okay through all of this, and so relieved that we decided against bringing our older daughter to their house that night. We can only imagine what could have happened had she been struck with something. My due date is currently 8 days away and I have an appointment the day of to discuss induction if she hasn't arrived by then, and baby number 1 was a week overdue and I had to be induced last time after my mother-in-law hit me while I was pregnant because she thought I was cheating. I did a checkup on the baby. Baby does end up being alright in the end, even after my mother-in-law kicked me a handful of times while I was on the ground. So, this is where it turns for the worst. We are home, and my husband has been a rock, very supportive and comforting to me the whole time. We went no contact with my mother-in-law and father-in-law and I genuinely thought he was on my side. I had come up with the idea to do paternity tests on our girls and send them to my mother-in-law to get back at her, and it seemed like a great idea. We got in contact with a lawyer and he suggested that we take the paternity tests through the court so we have it as evidence and then the results couldn't be contested as fraudulent/fake. That sounded great, right? Well, over the next few days my husband got more and more depressed. He started trying to get me to entertain the idea of minimizing mother-in-law's actions, and chalking up her behavior to old age. While I am aware that she's older, she's pretty sound-minded. I told him that she will be getting full screenings for her mental health when we go to court, and that while yes, she's old, she doesn't get to assault me and accuse me of horrible things and use her age as an excuse. If she's found to have some mental issues going on then I can deal with that, but that doesn't mean I ever want to be around her or have her around my kids. A few days go by and I'm nearing my induction day because the baby girl isn't making her entrance, and I find out that my husband has been talking with father-in-law and mother-in-law behind my back. We get in a big fight and he tells me that he still wants his mom to meet her granddaughter, and that we can put this aside until the baby is here. Then afterwards, once she's gotten to meet her, we can resume the legal issues. I am crying at this point as I thought he was supporting me through this, but in reality he caved in no less than 4 days to his mom. I reminded him that we have put in for a restraining order and no contact order and that he has now broken it by contacting them. His response? Well, the no contact order is issued to you, not me. And the restraining order hasn't been approved yet, so mother-in-law can come meet baby girl number 2 before we get approved without breaking any rules. All I could do was shake my head and cry. I put my foot down and said absolutely not, and I couldn't believe he'd let his mom around me or the baby after she could have killed one of us. He said that I was overeating, as the baby was not injured and she wasn't actually trying to hurt the baby, just me. What? She kicked my very pregnant belly repeatedly after she threw a snow globe at my head. We got in a huge fight about me not forgiving her and holding grudges and being unreasonable, and eventually he just left. Where'd he go? Yep, his mom's house is a few hours away. He then called me sobbing and told me that if I could see his mom right now I'd understand. Apparently when he pushed her while she was assaulting me, he indeed broke 2 of her fingers and she sprained her neck when she fell back into a shelving unit. She's laid up on a sofa in her living room, can't walk and in a severe depression. I should feel awful according to him. The least I could do is let her meet her new grandchild, and then figure out where to go from there. I'm so infuriated at this point, because not only has he retreated to his mom's house, he left me alone with our oldest daughter who is 2, while I'm supposed to be in bed rest, with effing stitches in my head and an 8-pound baby in my uterus who refuses to come out and I am so exhausted. He doesn't come home for the next 4 days until I'm supposed to check into the hospital for my scheduled induction. My sister comes to watch my oldest daughter and my husband takes me to the hospital for the induction. We get set up and they are poking me with things, shoving arms up where they don't belong, pumping me with pitocin and waiting to see if baby will come. He mostly sat in the room on his tablet, as I was admittedly pretty cold/grumpy with him still, and I abandoned my family because they deserved it. I abandoned my wife and my 13-year-old daughter a week after I discovered my wife's affair. It's now almost 6 months since that day. Our marriage had plenty of intimacy and was in good shape. I came home late from work, and there was a safety training seminar I had to attend. My wife Eve was sleeping on the sofa and a message with some emojis popped up on her phone. Emojis like I would use when I message her. I snooped and I found out what had been going on for at least 5 months. I knew the affair partner, Adam. He was a work colleague of hers. He was married and had 3 children. While reading the messages, something just snapped in my head. Over the course of reading their messages, I went from loving Eve more than anything, to hating her, to just going blank. Not just about her, but everything. Totally numb, I took pictures of the messages and went to bed. Eve was mad the next day that I went to bed without waking her up. She complained about neck pain from sleeping on the couch all night. During breakfast I didn't say a single word. My wife and daughter chatted away. They didn't seem to notice anything different about me. Or even acknowledge me. But I definitely didn't feel like myself. I went through all the daily motions, I went to work, did all the normal stuff. The only difference is I sort of stopped talking. Sadly I realized that nobody seemed to even notice. It's like I wasn't even there. I started to understand that Eve and my daughter didn't really love me. I was in the house with them, but unless they wanted something from me they didn't really interact. I would get these pangs of pain, they would come and go. Sometimes they would overwhelm me completely. I walked around like this for 5 days before Eve asked me if something was wrong during dinner. I had maybe uttered 3 words in total to her and my daughter in that period. I didn't even answer her question, I just made a confused face, then continued eating. She seemed okay with that. The next day I didn't go to work. I didn't really have a plan. I put it in my car and walked around the neighborhood for a while. I ended up at the kitchen table waiting for the wife to come home. She came home with a few bags of groceries. She immediately started talking about her day while unpacking. I just sat at the kitchen table in pain. She didn't even look at me apart from one glance as she entered the kitchen. Daughter popped in and did the same. Their backs were turned to me and they talked about some trivial crap on sale. I have never felt so rejected, unappreciated, so alone. I was thinking back on our lives and all I could see was that they didn't care about me at all. They probably never did, I was an accessory to their life. I was hit with a wave of pain, I cried, still they didn't notice, so I got angry, very angry. I had a glass of water in front of me, I stood up and threw it hard at the tiles over the sink. It just exploded, glass shards rained over everything. They froze, unsure what to do when they saw my contorted tear-soaked face. It was uncomfortably quiet for a long while before I spoke. Eve, I know all about your cheating with Adam. My daughter looked at Eve. What? Is that true, Mom? Eve started to try to explain. She briefly glanced at me and said, sorry, I can explain. Then she turned back to our daughter and they started arguing. Again, it was like I was invisible or something. After a few minutes watching their increasingly heated argument, I just walked out and got in my car. I looked at them again through the window, still arguing in the kitchen. They didn't even notice I had left. I sat there for a few more minutes before I gave up and just drove off. It took maybe 15 minutes before Eve tried to call me, then call after call after call, then a flood of texts from both of them. I just ignored it and eventually turned the phone off. The next day I took half of our money out and called my boss. I told him I didn't know when I would be back. He told me if I didn't show up I was fired. I just told him okay and hung up. I just didn't care. I went to Adam's house, his wife opened. I gave her a copy of the messages and told her what Adam and my wife had been up to. I left her crying on the stairs. At the end of the day I ended up in a cheap hotel at the edge of town. The next few days were kind of a blur. Eve's older brother is a cop named Bob. Bob showed up on the 4th day. I don't know how he found me. He tried to interrogate me, but I didn't say anything. When I didn't engage, he told me I was under arrest and put me in cuffs. However, he didn't take me to the station like I expected. He took me home instead. Bob dragged me into the living room where my wife and daughter immediately started berating me. Still I said nothing. I just listened in amazement while they told me how terrible this was for them. What a terrible a-hole I was for making them worry. It went on for a while. In the end Eve screamed at me, say something. I stared at her for a while before calmly saying, I have nothing to say to you, Beach. Bob freaked out, and slammed me against the wall, screaming at me to not talk to his sister that way. I got a lot of satisfaction out of Bob's violent reaction. I don't know why, it made me so happy I was laughing. Bob's wife left him 4 months earlier. I smiled at Bob. You're pathetic, Bob. Did you hurt your wife, Bob? Is that why she left you? Bob hurt me hard. I went down. Wife and daughter started screaming their heads off. As I started to get up I just laughed even harder. I just couldn't help myself. I am still in handcuffs, laughing. I said, F you, Bob. He knocked me out cold this time. I woke up in the hospital. I puked all over the floor the second I opened my eyes, so I knew I had a concussion. Eve, Bob and my daughter were there. They were talking to me. I was too confused to make it out. A nurse appeared and asked them to leave. She got me a pan to puke in and called someone to clean. While she was taking my pulse, I told her that my family put me here and that they were not to come anywhere near me. If they came back into the room I would leave. I would just run away. She argued kind of sternly that running or even getting up was a really bad idea for me. But she would talk to security. I didn't see them again in the hospital. It was bliss. I decided to disappear, to turn into a ghost. I wanted nothing to do with these people ever again. I made a letter to each of them. I warned Bob that if he ever bothered me again I would report him. I told my daughter that Eve had betrayed me and that she would be without a father from now on. To Eve I made a longer letter. I tried to be as practical as possible. I told her to sell the house, that I won't be paying the mortgage or utilities anymore. I told her reconciliation, or even contact was impossible, especially after she had sent her brother to drag me back and hurt me senseless in front of them. I explained that I won't do anything for her ever again, so if she wants a divorce she will have to arrange it. I told her I will disappear and I don't want to be found. I ended it with, if she interferes with my life again I will simply end myself. I really regret giving her that last sentence. It's like I let her steal a little bit more of me, like I let her give me a little more pain. In the hospital I made a plan on how I could disappear. Eve gave the hospital some fresh clothes that they forwarded to me. Then one evening I just went out the rear fire escape. I triggered some kind of alarm. I was panicking a bit, but thankfully no one stopped me. I got back to the hotel to pick up my car. I traded it with a small RV and set off. I got a new phone. The only person I called was my father. I told him everything and told him if he gave my new number to anyone I would become totally unreachable, forever. He could call me if he needed to reach me if I needed to sign something. Other than that I wanted to be left alone. For the first few months I grieved the loss of my old life, but I came to realize that I grieved the loss of a fantasy. A memory that only existed in my head. The loving wife and daughter, the family, friends. It was all just an illusion in my head. These people never really cared for me. Over time I started to rebuild. Only this time I was a total ghost. I rent a safety deposit box to keep valuables and cash. I do odd jobs for money. I hunt and fish and scavenge. My money consumption is insignificant, so my cash reserves are actually growing. I don't pay taxes, I don't have a bank account. When people ask my name I answer people call me Fred. I go out of my way to not contribute to society or anything else for that matter. All in all my life is getting better. At least now no one is using me for nothing but their own benefit while pretending they care about me. I don't know what happened to my wife and daughter, my old friends or the rest of the family. I don't know if I am divorced now or if I owe child support. I don't know what happened to the house. I don't really care. My father has tried to give me information a few times but I shut that down hard. He is the only one I speak to occasionally from my old life. Update: I abandoned my family because they deserved it. As I was reflecting on everything yesterday I was starting to experience something similar to the day I tried to confront Eve. The world got muffled. I felt I needed to log off. I called a hunting friend and asked if he could come over. We talked on the phone until he arrived and the first thing he did was to confiscate all my ammunition. So he was pretty worried I guess. He called my dad and stayed with me until he arrived. I have moved to a different city so that took over 4 hours. Long story short. Dad arrived and he took me to see a doctor. As a result I have been committed to a psychiatric facility. The doctors suspect that I suffer from emotional and psychological trauma. Probably depression as well. Apparently, the numbness, extreme desire to self-isolate, strange reactive behaviors like laughing at being physically hurt, nobody loves me, feeling undeserving, reclusive, are pretty clear indicators according to the doc. I hope to talk to my daughter in the near future if the counselors say it's okay for me and her and if she wants to. My dad has talked to her a bit about the situation. He tells me that she loves me and asks for me. My dad is with me for now and I will be monitored 24/7 for the next few days. They tried some medication but I had a very negative reaction so they will try something else tomorrow. Also, Bob somehow found out about me and DM'd my account and apologized. Eve hadn't told him the real reason I left for the hotel. She had just told him about the glass in the wall, leaving the rest out. Bob told me he had informed his superiors what he had done when he found out. According to him everyone that should be, has been informed. He was suspended and ordered to undergo anger management training. If I submit a complaint he would be dismissed. He has prepared a full written confession and all the paperwork for me if I choose to do so. All I needed to do was read it and if I agreed to sign it he would be dismissed. I decided to call Bob's employer and plead in Bob's case that he continues as a cop. Bob visited me on Thursday. He had prepared all the paperwork for me to file a complaint against him. He made no excuses, he admitted his behavior was completely out of line. He apologized for losing his cool, and that it was entirely his fault. He pushed me pretty hard to file against him actually. But I have been thinking about him. I have seen him throw himself in the path of a punch to protect an old woman being attacked. I know a lot of his colleagues, and they always talk about how he will always go that extra mile to help someone. I found out why his wife divorced him as well. Bob doesn't make much but he donates 10% of his salary and volunteers 3 days a week to help the homeless. Apparently his ex found this to be unbearable. Bob refused to stop helping so she divorced him. Bob is a good man, he lost control one time. I lost my way for over 6 months. Edit: I have been out of the psych ward since Friday morning. I have been getting a lot of therapy and I am doing much better. I have daily treatment but I no longer need to be committed. I suffer the after effect of emotional trauma and have mild PTSD. My behavior has naturally been off as a result of this. I have been in intensive therapy and I am getting some medication. I only take the meds now and again at this stage if I feel overwhelmed. Some of my behavior, especially the isolation, probably made things even worse for me. I have talked a lot to my daughter. She tells me she has forgiven me. She never meant to make me feel unappreciated. She loves me. The first few days I didn't actually believe her. But once I got some perspective I realized this doubt was all on me. I have apologized more times than I can count. She started telling me to stop apologizing actually. She has moved away from her mother and is living with my brother and his family at the moment. She gets along really well with his kids and my brother has told us that she can stay for as long as she wants. I am in no condition to be a full-time parent at the moment, so for now, she will stay with them. My brother has arranged therapy for her and I will do my best to be the best father I can be from now on. My wife, Eve, has also moved out of the house, and is living with her parents. My father has been paying the mortgage for me, without me knowing. So the house isn't sold yet. I am not looking forward to going back there to all the memories. I have decided to sell the house and downsize to a tiny home and live a life closer to nature with less stress. I will try to rent or buy a plot of land and live as simply as possible, at least for a while. My daughter loves this idea and has been researching tiny homes like a pro. Adam, the affair partner, is trying to reconcile with his wife and has cut Eve off completely. Eve has been to my dad's house almost weekly begging for him to contact me and let her talk to me. If what her mother tells me is correct, Eve lost her job and is in a terrible way. Barely leaving her room at her parents' house, she is shunned by pretty much everyone according to her mom. I have found a lawyer today and will start divorce proceedings ASAP. I bought a whole case of my hunting buddy's favorite whiskey and spent Saturday night there, thanking him. He is a true friend. He probably saved my life. My wife's affair completely broke me and my family. I was so broken I couldn't even see it myself. Up until then I was sort of holding myself together by convincing myself that I was doing better. But the truth is I was hanging on by the tiniest of threads.